at 08:47 on the morning of November 2nd, 1943. Major Raymond Harold Wilkins banked his B-25 Mitchell bomber over the Coral Sea, watching 74 other bombers spread across the sky ahead of him, all of them pointed at the most heavily defended target in the Pacific, Simpson Harbor, Rabaul. 300 anti-aircraft guns ringed that harbor. 5 airfields surrounded it. More than 100 Japanese fighters waited on those strips, refueled and rearmed after the Americans had hit them 3 days before. Wilkins knew the numbers. Every pilot in the 5th Air Force knew the numbers. He had positioned his squadron, the 8th Bombardment Squadron, to enter the target last. He had briefed his pilots so that his own aircraft would fly the left flank, the position of greatest exposure, the spot where anti-aircraft gunners would have the longest time to track and fire. His co-pilot had asked why. Wilkins said it was where the squadron commander belonged. 26 years old, from a town so small it barely appeared on maps. He had enlisted as a private, worked his way up through the ranks, earned his wings 11 days before the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Now he commanded a squadron. Now he was leading them into what General George Kenney himself had called the toughest target in the Southwest Pacific. The B-25 ahead of him began its descent toward the water. Wilkins followed, dropping from 8,000 feet toward the wave tops, toward the masthead height approach that skip bombing demanded. In 18 minutes, he would face a choice that would define what leadership means. In 18 minutes, he would have a safe path home. He would not take it. Act 1. The Making of a Commander. Raymond Harold Wilkins was born on September 28, 1917, in Portsmouth, Virginia. His parents, William Samuel Wilkins and Florida Alverta Harold Wilkins, brought him home to Columbia, North Carolina, when he was 2 years old. Columbia, Tyrrell County, population under 1,000, a timber town on the Scuppernong River, where boys learned to work before they learned much else. Ray Wilkins grew up in that town through the 1920s and 1930s. He graduated from the local high school in 1934, one of a handful of students to do so that year. That fall, at 17 years old, he entered the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He registered as a pharmacy major. His plan was medical school. His plan was to become a doctor, to return to Tyrrell County, to serve the people who had raised him. The plan lasted 2 years. In 1936, Raymond Wilkins left the University of North Carolina. He enlisted as a private in the United States Army Air Corps. He was 19 years old. The reasons for leaving have never been recorded. Money may have played a role. The Depression still gripped the country, and a private's pay was steady work. Adventure may have played a role. The Air Corps offered something that pharmacy school never could, whatever the reason. Raymond Wilkins traded his textbooks for a uniform. He was assigned to Langley Field in Virginia. He rose quickly through the enlisted ranks. From private to corporal to staff sergeant, he wanted to fly. The Army assigned him to clerical duty instead. For 4 years, he pushed paper. For 4 years, he watched pilots come and go while he remained on the ground. He did not give up. By 1940, Staff Sergeant Wilkins had found another path. He applied to the Cadet Training Corps at Smith Air College in St. Louis. He was accepted. From St. Louis, he transferred to Kelly Field in Texas. He excelled there, rising to Cadet Corps Captain, leading his fellow students while mastering the aircraft that would carry him to war. On October 31st, 1941, Raymond Wilkins pinned on his wings and his gold bars. Second lieutenant, pilot. 5 years after enlisting as a private, 11 days later, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Wilkins was assigned to duty in the Philippines. He boarded a transport in San Francisco, part of a convoy called the Pensacola convoy, bound for Manila. They never arrived. Midway across the Pacific, word came that the Japanese had attacked. Manila was burning. The Philippines were under siege. The convoy diverted to Brisbane, Australia. Second Lieutenant Raymond Wilkins arrived in Australia 4 days before Christmas, 1941. He was assigned to the 3rd Bombardment Group, one of the oldest units in the Army Air Corps, now desperately short of pilots and aircraft. The group was equipped with what the Army had available: a 20 Havocs, a 24 dive bombers, a handful of B-25 Mitchells. The A-24s were obsolete before they arrived. Slow, vulnerable, designed for a different kind of war, Wilkins would learn to fly them anyway. In late December 1941, Wilkins learned to fly the A-24 at Amberley Field. His instructor was First Lieutenant Herman F. Lowry. The training was rushed. The situation was desperate, and there was no time for anything but the essentials. On March 30th, 1942, Wilkins was officially assigned to the 8th Bombardment Squadron of the 3rd Bombardment Group, 5th Air Force. That same day, at 4 in the afternoon, he ferried an A-24 from Charters Towers Airfield to 7 Mile Drome near Port Moresby in New Guinea. Port Moresby, the last Allied stronghold on New Guinea. Japanese forces were pushing south along the coast, aiming to take the port and cut off Australia from the rest of the Pacific. The 3rd Bombardment Group was all that stood in their way. On April 7th, 1942, 2nd Lieutenant Raymond Wilkins flew his first combat mission. 6 A-24 dive bombers took off from 7 Mile Drome, escorted by 6 P-40I Kitty Hawks from No. 75 Squadron. Their target was Lae Airfield, a Japanese base on the northern coast of New Guinea. 2 A-24s aborted due to mechanical problems. The remaining 4 pressed on. Over Lae, they dove on the airfield, releasing their bombs on parked Japanese aircraft. Anti-aircraft fire rose to meet them. Japanese fighters scrambled from the strip. All 4 A-24s made it back to 7 Mile Drome. Wilkins had survived his first mission. He would fly 86 more. The A-24 was a death trap, slow and lumbering. It could not outrun Japanese fighters. Lightly armed, it could not fight back effectively. The dive bombing technique required a steep approach, which made the aircraft an easy target for anti-aircraft gunners who could track its predictable path. On July 29, 1942, Wilkins took off piloting an A-24 as one of 8 aircraft assigned to bomb Japanese ships off Gona. P-39 Airacobras flew escort, top cover from the 41st Fighter Squadron, close escort from the 80th Fighter Squadron. 1 A-24 aborted before reaching the target. 7 pressed on. Japanese Zeros from the Tainan Air Group intercepted them as they began their dives. The first wave of 3 aircraft included Major Floyd Rogers, Lieutenant Hill, and Lieutenant Wilkins. The Zeros tore into them. Of the 7 A-24s that attacked the convoy that day, only 2 returned to 7 Mile Drome. Major Rogers was killed. 4 other pilots were killed. Lieutenant Hill force-landed his heavily damaged aircraft at Fall River. Raymond Wilkins landed at 7 Mile Drome. His aircraft had survived. He had survived. 5 of his fellow pilots had not. The A-24 was pulled from combat shortly afterward. The slow, vulnerable dive bomber could not survive in the skies over New Guinea. Wilkins transitioned to the B-25 Mitchell. Act 2. Ship Killer. The North American B-25 Mitchell was a different kind of weapon. Medium bomber, twin engines, crew of 5 to 6, maximum speed of 275 miles per hour, range of 1,350 miles, bomb load of 3,000 pounds, but the specifications did not capture what made the B-25 deadly in the Pacific. General George Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force, had arrived in Australia in July 1942. He found a demoralized force equipped with worn-out aircraft, fighting a losing battle against Japanese air and naval superiority. Kenny changed everything. He brought with him an idea, a tactic that would transform the B-25 from a conventional medium bomber into a ship-killing weapon. Skip bombing. The concept was simple. A bomber would approach an enemy ship at wave-top height, flying directly at the vessel. At the right moment, the pilot would release a bomb equipped with a delayed action fuse. The bomb would skip across the water like a stone across a pond, striking the ship's hull at or below the waterline. The delayed fuse would allow the bomb to penetrate the hull before detonating. The physics were devastating. An explosion below the waterline, amplified by the incompressibility of water, would tear a ship apart from the inside. But the tactic was extraordinarily dangerous. To skip a bomb accurately, the pilot had to fly at masthead height, 50 feet, sometimes lower, directly into the teeth of every anti-aircraft gun on the target ship and every escort vessel nearby. No evasive maneuvers, no altitude for safety, just a straight run at a floating fortress bristling with guns. The B-25 crews of the 5th Air Force mastered it anyway. The modifications came first. Standard B-25s carried defensive armament, machine guns in the nose, in the dorsal turret, in the waist positions, in the tail. Adequate for defending against fighters, inadequate for suppressing ship-borne anti-aircraft fire during a skip bombing run. Kenny's solution was to turn the B-25 into a strafer. Additional forward-firing machine guns were mounted in the nose, 4, then 6, then 8 50-caliber weapons pointing straight ahead. Some aircraft received even more, turning the bomber into a flying gun platform. The tactic became strafe and skip. The B-25 would approach at masthead height, all forward guns blazing, raking the enemy ship's deck with 50-caliber fire to suppress the anti-aircraft gunners. At the optimal distance, the pilot would release the bomb, then pull up and over the target as the bomb skipped into the hull. It required precision flying. It required steady nerves. It required pilots willing to fly into the fire and keep flying. Raymond Wilkins proved to be such a pilot. Throughout 1942 and 1943, Wilkins flew mission after mission, Port Moresby, Lae, Salamaua, Finschhafen, wherever the Japanese had ships, wherever they had supplies, wherever they had troops, the B-25s of the 3rd Bombardment Group went. Wilkins was promoted to first lieutenant, then to captain. Each promotion came with more responsibility, more missions, more chances to die. He earned the Silver Star for actions in April 1942, a week before the Doolittle raid on Japan. He earned the Distinguished Flying Cross, then another, then another, then a 4th. By the end of his first year of combat, Captain Raymond Wilkins had logged more than 50 missions. He was eligible for rotation back to the United States. He declined. Wilkins had seen what happened when experienced pilots left. New pilots arrived from training, eager and untested. They flew their first missions against an enemy that had been fighting for years. Too many of them did not come back. He stayed. In September 1943, Major Raymond Wilkins was given command of the 8th Bombardment Squadron, 26 years old, squadron commander, responsible for every pilot, every crew, every aircraft in his unit. He took the job seriously. As squadron commander, he continued to lead the tough missions himself, not from the rear, not from the operations tent, but from the cockpit of a B-25 flying into the fire. His pilots noticed, his crews noticed. The men of the 8th Bombardment Squadron followed him because he led from the front. By the fall of 1943, the 5th Air Force had its eyes on Rabaul. Rabaul was the anchor of Japanese power in the Southwest Pacific. Located on the northeastern tip of New Britain Island, it possessed one of the finest natural harbors in the Pacific. Simpson Harbor, deep water, protected anchorage, room for an entire fleet. The Japanese had seized Rabaul in January 1942. They had turned it into a fortress. Docks and warehouses lined the harbor. 5 airfields surrounded the town. More than 300 anti-aircraft guns protected the complex. Every supply convoy heading to New Guinea passed through Rabaul. Every reinforcement, every warship, every aircraft that threatened the Allied advance. General Kenny decided to neutralize it. The Rabaul campaign began on October 12, 1943. B-25s and their P-38 Lightning escorts hit the base every day the weather permitted. They struck the airfields, they struck the harbor, they struck the anti-aircraft positions. The Japanese fought back. By October 29th, American intelligence estimated that only 50 or 60 Japanese fighters remained operational at Rabaul. The campaign appeared to be succeeding. They were wrong. On October 30th, the Japanese moved in more than 100 fresh fighters from Truk. The Americans did not know. They planned the next strike based on outdated intelligence. November 2nd, 1943. The largest raid yet. 9 squadrons of B-25s, all at about half strength after weeks of combat attrition. 80 P-38, Lightnings for escort. Their target, the ships in Simpson Harbor. Major Raymond Wilkins briefed his squadron the night before. The briefing was held in the operations tent at their forward base. Pilots and crews gathered around the map, studying the harbor, the anti-aircraft positions, the expected enemy fighter strength. Wilkins laid out the plan. 4 squadrons would hit the anti-aircraft positions on shore and lay a smoke screen to cover the attack. The remaining 5 squadrons would strike the ships in the harbor. Lieutenant Colonel Jock Hennebury would lead the ship-killing force. The 8th Bombardment Squadron, Wilkins's squadron, would be the last to enter the target area. Last in meant facing the most organized response. The anti-aircraft gunners would have found their range. The surviving fighters would have time to engage. The smoke from earlier bombs might obscure the targets, forcing last-second adjustments. Wilkins told his pilots that he would fly the left flank position, the spot where the gunners would have the longest tracking time, the spot of greatest danger. No one argued. Sabra, Act 3, Simpson Harbor, November 2nd, 1943. The weather broke at dawn, scattered clouds, visibility good. The mission was on. 75 B-25 Mitchells took off from their bases in New Guinea. 80 P-38 Lightnings rose to join them. They formed up over the coastline, then turned northeast toward New Britain. Major Raymond Wilkins flew B-25D, serial number 41-30311. The crew had named her Fifi. She carried a crew of 5, a full load of fuel, and 2 1,000-pound bombs with delayed action fuses. At 08:47, the formation began its descent toward the target. At 09:02, the first wave of B-25s crossed the coast of New Britain. Anti-aircraft fire erupted immediately. Black puffs of flak dotted the sky. Tracers arced up from the gun positions ringing the harbor. The bombers pressed on. The smokescreen aircraft went in first, dropping their loads on the shore batteries, laying a curtain of white smoke across the harbor approaches. Behind them, the ship killers descended to wave-top height. Lieutenant Colonel Hennebury led them in. At 09:07, the first skip bombs struck Japanese shipping. Explosions rippled across Simpson Harbor. A freighter took a hit amidships, began listing. A transport erupted in flames. The B-25s roared over the harbor at masthead height. Guns blazing, bombs skipping across the water. The Japanese responded with everything they had. At 09:11, Major Wilkins led the 8th Bombardment Squadron into the target area. Smoke from the preceding attacks obscured much of the harbor. Wilkins had seconds to assess the situation, seconds to revise his approach. The original targets were invisible. New targets had to be selected. A new attack angle had to be chosen. He made the call. The squadron adjusted. They came in through the heaviest concentration of anti-aircraft fire, the only clear path to the remaining ships. Wilkins held his position on the left flank, the most exposed spot in the formation. At 0913, his aircraft was hit. The shell struck the right wing. Control surfaces damaged. The B-25 shuddered, yawed, then stabilized as Wilkins fought the controls. He could have pulled out. Standard procedure for a damaged aircraft was to withdraw from the target area, to save the crew, to save the aircraft for another day. Wilkins kept flying. At 0914, he opened fire on a cluster of small harbor vessels. The forward-firing 50 calibers raked their decks, suppressing the anti-aircraft gunners who were tracking his approach. Ahead, a Japanese destroyer lay at anchor. Wilkins adjusted his course. At 0915, Major Raymond Wilkins released his first bomb. The 1,000-pound weapon dropped from the bomber bay, struck the water, skipped once, twice, and slammed into the destroyer's hull amidships. The delayed fuse triggered. The destroyer exploded. Fire and debris erupted from the vessel. The hull split open. Secondary explosions tore through the ship as ammunition cooked off. Within minutes, the destroyer would be gone. Wilkins had one bomb left. Anti-aircraft fire from the dying destroyer had found its mark. Shells tore into Wilkins' left vertical stabilizer. The tail section of the B-25 was coming apart. Control became even more difficult. The aircraft wanted to yaw, to spin, to tumble out of the sky. Wilkins held it steady through sheer force of will and skill. He could have withdrawn. His bomb had struck home. His mission was accomplished. No one would have questioned a damaged aircraft leaving the fight. Wilkins kept flying. At 0917, he identified a new target, a Japanese transport, 9,000 tons, cargo ship or troop carrier. It represented supplies or soldiers that would never reach the Japanese forces in New Guinea. He came in at below masthead height. At 0918, Major Raymond Wilkins released his second bomb. The weapon skipped across the harbor waters, rose slightly, and struck the transport's hull. The ship erupted in flames. Fire engulfed the vessel from bow to stern. Smoke boiled into the sky. Whatever the transport carried, ammunition, fuel, supplies, it was burning. 2 ships destroyed. Both bombs expended. Mission accomplished. Wilkins signaled his squadron to begin withdrawal. The surviving B-25s of the 8th Bombardment Squadron turned toward the harbor exit, toward the open sea, toward home. A Japanese heavy cruiser blocked the path. The cruiser had positioned itself to cover the harbor exit. Its anti-aircraft batteries were intact. Its guns were tracking the withdrawing American bombers. For the pilots of the 8th Bombardment Squadron, there was no way around. They would have to fly through the cruiser's field of fire. They would have to absorb whatever the Japanese gunners could throw at them. Wilkins assessed the situation in seconds. His bombs were gone. His aircraft was badly damaged. His squadron was vulnerable. He made his decision. At 0921, Major Raymond Wilkins turned his crippled B-25 directly toward the Japanese heavy cruiser. His guns were still working. His engines were still running. He had one weapon left: himself. He opened fire. 50 caliber tracers streaked across the water toward the cruiser. Wilkins raked the ship's deck, targeting the anti-aircraft positions, drawing their attention, drawing their fire toward him, away from his squadron. The cruiser's gunners responded. Shells tore into Wilkins' aircraft. The already damaged left stabilizer was blown completely off. The B-25 began to yaw violently, swinging toward the other aircraft in the formation. If Wilkins tried to correct normally, his damaged aircraft would swerve into his wingmen. He would take them down with him. He made one final decision. At 09:22, Major Raymond Wilkins rolled his B-25 over, exposing the belly and full wing surfaces of his aircraft to the enemy fire. The maneuver kept him clear of his wingmen. The maneuver presented the largest possible target to the Japanese gunners. They did not miss. Shells caught the exposed belly of the B-25. They caught the wings. The left wing crumpled, folded, tore away from the fuselage. The aircraft was past control. At 09:23, Fifi, B-25D serial number 41-30311, crashed upside down into the waters of Simpson Harbor. Major Raymond Harold Wilkins was 26 years old. The remaining aircraft of the 8th Bombardment Squadron cleared the harbor. Every one of them made it out. Act 4. The Weight of Sacrifice. The raid on Simpson Harbor on November 2nd, 1943, was the most intense aerial engagement in the Southwest Pacific up to that point. Initial assessments credited the attacking force with sinking or damaging 30 of 38 ships in the harbor. 85 Japanese aircraft were claimed destroyed. Thousands of tons of supplies went up in flames. The cost was 8 B-25s and 9 P-38 Lightnings lost. Some crews who went down or ditched on the way home were later recovered. Others, like Major Wilkins and his crew, were not. Later analysis revised some of the claims. The fog of war, the smoke over the harbor, the chaos of combat had led to some double counting, but the fundamental truth remained. The 5th Air Force had struck Rabaul a devastating blow. The men who flew with Wilkins that day told the story afterward. They described the moment his aircraft was first hit. They described how he kept flying. They described the destroyer exploding. They described the transport burning. They described the cruiser blocking the exit. They described what he did next. Captain, later Major General. Jock Hennebree led the ship-killing force that day. His own aircraft was so badly damaged that he crash-landed on the way home, but he survived to bear witness. The testimony was consistent. Major Wilkins had attacked the cruiser to draw its fire. Major Wilkins had deliberately exposed his aircraft to save his squadron. Major Wilkins had made a choice. He could have tried to escape. He chose to fight. He could have saved himself. He chose to save his men. From the Japanese perspective, the raid was a disaster. Simpson Harbor had been considered a safe anchorage. The anti-aircraft defenses were among the strongest in the Pacific. The fighter cover was substantial. The American bombers should not have been able to inflict such damage, but they had. Japanese records from the period are incomplete. Much was destroyed in the final days of the war, but what survives indicates confusion and alarm. The low-level attacks were difficult to counter. The skip bombing technique was devastatingly effective against shipping. The American pilots pressed their attacks with a ferocity that surprised Japanese defenders accustomed to more cautious tactics. And one American pilot had attacked a heavy cruiser alone, with no bombs remaining, flying a crippled aircraft, for no apparent tactical gain except to draw fire from his squadron. The Japanese had a word for such behavior. They understood willingness to die for a mission. They did not expect to see it from Americans. The Rabaul campaign continued through November 1943. On November 5th, carrier aircraft from Task Force 38 struck the base. On November 11th, they struck again. The 5th Air Force maintained pressure whenever weather permitted. By the end of the month, Rabaul was effectively neutralized. The Japanese still held the base. They would hold it until the end of the war. But it was no longer a significant threat. The surrounding airfields were too damaged to support major operations. The harbor was too dangerous for major fleet units. The Allied advance continued. New Britain was bypassed. The road to the Philippines was open. Major Raymond Wilkins did not live to see it. Wilkins' remains were never recovered. The waters of Simpson Harbor kept their dead. Fifi lies somewhere beneath those waters still, along with her crew, along with her pilot. The Army listed Major Raymond Harold Wilkins as missing in action. Later, the status was changed to killed in action. His family in Columbia, North Carolina, received the telegram. William Samuel Wilkins and Florida Alberta Harrell. Wilkins learned that their son was gone. He was the last surviving member of the original 3rd Bombardment Group that had formed in Australia nearly 2 years before, March 24, 1944. General Order Number 23 was published. Major Raymond Harold Wilkins was awarded the Medal of Honor, posthumously. The citation detailed his actions, leading his squadron, positioning his aircraft for greatest risk, continuing the attack after being hit, destroying the destroyer, destroying the transport, attacking the cruiser to cover his squadron's withdrawal, exposing his aircraft to enemy fire to avoid hitting his wingmen. The final line read, "In the fierce engagement, Major Wilkins destroyed 2 enemy vessels, and his heroic self-sacrifice made possible the safe withdrawal of the remaining planes of his squadron." Heroic self-sacrifice. The words captured what the men who flew with him already knew. Act 5. What Remains? Raymond Wilkins has no grave. A marker in his memory was placed at Olive Branch Cemetery in Portsmouth, Virginia, the city of his birth. A cenotaph, an empty tomb, a place where those who wish to remember can come and stand. His parents returned there. His siblings returned there. The Wilkins family gathered at that marker to mourn a son who never came home. In the years after the war, there was an effort to honor him. Yokota Air Base in Japan was to be renamed Wilkins Army Airfield. Orders were prepared. The name was selected. Raymond Wilkins would have a base named for him in the country he had helped to defeat. The orders never arrived. Bureaucracy intervened. Paperwork was lost. The renaming never occurred. Yokota remained Yokota, but traces of the intention survived. Metal manhole covers stamped WAAB were installed around the base. They remained in use for decades. A street was named for him. A stadium bore his name for a time. Small things, quiet remembrances. The kind of memorial that fades unless someone chooses to remember. On November 2nd, 2003, exactly 60 years after the raid on Simpson Harbor, the North Carolina Department of Transportation took action. United States Route 64 passes through Tyrrell County, North Carolina. It passes through Columbia, the town where Raymond Wilkins grew up. The road was officially designated the Major Raymond H. Wilkins Memorial Highway. A ceremony was held, speeches were given, the highway signs went up. Travelers on Route 64 now pass through Wilkins' hometown on a road that bears his name. Most do not know who he was. Most do not know what he did, but the signs remain. In Columbia itself, another memorial stands. The Tyrrell County War Memorial lists the names of local men and women who served and died in America's wars. Raymond Harold Wilkins is inscribed there, among the sons of Tyrrell County who did not return. It is a small monument in a small town, population still under 1,000. The kind of place that sends its children off to war and waits for them to come home, and mourns when they do not. Columbia mourned Raymond Wilkins. Columbia remembers him still. The 3rd Bombardment Group, the Grim Reapers, continued to fight after Wilkins' death. They struck targets across the Pacific. They supported the landings in the Philippines. They flew until the Japanese surrender in August 1945. The group's history records the names of all its Medal of Honor recipients. Raymond Wilkins is among them, the only one from the 8th Bombardment Squadron, the only one from the Rabaul campaign. His photograph hangs in the unit's historical collection. A young man in flight gear, serious expression, the kind of face that does not reveal what lies beneath. The skip bombing tactics that Wilkins used over Simpson Harbor became standard doctrine for the 5th Air Force. The low-level attacks, the forward-firing guns, the precision bombing that turned medium bombers into ship killers. General George Kenney wrote about these tactics after the war. He wrote about the men who flew them. He wrote about the cost. Kenney's memoirs, General Kenney Reports, describe the Rabaul campaign in detail. They describe the losses, they describe the victories, they describe the kind of courage that cannot be ordered, only offered. Raymond Wilkins offered it. What does leadership look like? It looks like a squadron commander who positions his aircraft for greatest risk because that is where the commander belongs. It looks like a pilot who keeps flying after his aircraft is hit because his mission is not complete. It looks like a man who attacks an enemy cruiser with no bombs remaining because his squadron needs to get home. It looks like a choice, made in seconds, that defines everything. Major Raymond Harold Wilkins was 26 years old when he died. He had enlisted as a private at 19. He had earned his wings at 24. He had commanded a squadron at 26. He had flown 87 combat missions. He had survived the death trap of the A-24. He had mastered the ship-killing tactics of the B-25. He had led men into the most heavily defended target in the Pacific. And when the moment came, when he had a safe path home, he chose to attack again. Not for glory, not for medals, not for history, for his men. The photograph shows a harbor full of smoke. Simpson Harbor, November 2nd, 1943. Black columns rising from burning ships, white smoke from the screening aircraft, the chaos of a strike in progress. Somewhere in that photograph, not visible, not recorded, a B-25 called Fifi is making her final approach. Her pilot is rolling her over to clear his wingman. Her left wing is about to crumple. In seconds, she will crash into the water. In seconds, her pilot will become a memory. But the men of the 8th Bombardment Squadron will clear the harbor. They will turn toward home. They will live to fly again, because Raymond Wilkins gave them the chance. He had a safe path home. He attacked again to save his squadron. This is what remains: a cenotaph in Portsmouth, a highway in North Carolina, a name on a memorial in Columbia, manhole covers stamped with initials at Yokota Air Base, a citation in the records of the Medal of Honor, and a truth that transcends all of it. Leadership is not about rank. Leadership is not about authority. Leadership is not about giving orders from safety. Leadership is about being willing to do what you ask others to do. Leadership is about going first into danger. Leadership is about making the choice that costs everything, so that others might survive. Major Raymond Harold Wilkins understood this. On November 2nd, 1943, he proved it. And the waters of Simpson Harbor are quiet now. Rabaul is part of Papua New Guinea. The Japanese are gone. The war is 80 years in the past. Fishermen work the harbor where warships once anchored. Children play on beaches where bombs once fell. Somewhere beneath those waters, Fifi rests with her crew. Somewhere beneath those waters, Raymond Wilkins keeps his final station. He was 26 years old. He was from a small town. He was a private who became a major. He was a squadron commander who led from the front. He was a man who had a safe path home and chose not to take it. Remember him.